Welcome to our channel. This is a C2-level English listening experience. If you are looking for fast explanations or simple conclusions, this video may feel demanding. That is intentional. Here, the language is layered, the ideas unfold slowly, and the meaning is not always given directly. If you are not yet comfortable with this level, you may want to explore other videos on the channel designed for different listening stages. Today's topic may feel familiar, but its direction might surprise you. It begins with self-awareness, with reflection, with a desire to understand oneself more clearly. And yet, somewhere along the way, something changes. Before we go further, consider subscribing and sharing this video if you find value in this kind of long-form listening. It helps the channel grow and allows these projects to continue. Now, let's begin.
Self-awareness is usually introduced as a solution, a quiet improvement, a form of maturity. We are told that if we observe ourselves closely enough, if we reflect on our thoughts, our emotions, our reactions, we will become calmer, wiser, more balanced. And at first, this feels true. There is relief in naming what we feel, comfort in understanding why we behave the way we do, a sense of control in watching ourselves from a distance. But there is a subtle shift that often goes unnoticed. The moment self-awareness stops being a tool and starts becoming a place where the mind lives. At that point, awareness no longer opens space. It begins to narrow it. Instead of experiencing life, the individual begins to observe life. Instead of feeling, they monitor. Instead of connecting, they evaluate. This shift does not arrive loudly. It does not announce itself as a problem. It arrives disguised as growth. And this is where the modern world quietly amplifies it. Never before have people been encouraged to look at themselves so constantly, to document emotions, to narrate inner states, to turn private moments into visible signals. What once happened inside the mind now happens in front of a screen. The self becomes something to be managed, curated, adjusted. At first, this feels like expression, like honesty, like presence. But slowly, something changes. The question is no longer, what am I feeling? But how does this look? And once that question takes root, attention turns inward, not for understanding, but for presentation. This is not vanity in the traditional sense. It is something quieter, more internal, a habit of watching oneself exist. The danger is not that people care too much about themselves. The danger is that they stop being with themselves. And this is where the myth quietly enters. Not as a story, not as a lesson, but as a pattern that has repeated itself for centuries. A figure who did not fall in love with power, or wealth, or conquest, but with his own reflection. The figure from the myth does not chase admiration. He does not seek attention. That is the part often misunderstood. He does not look into the water because he wants to be seen. He looks because he wants to understand what he sees. And that distinction matters. At first, the reflection feels reassuring, stable, predictable. Unlike other people, it does not contradict him. It does not interrupt. It does not demand. It simply mirrors. And this is where the danger deepens. Because the reflection does not grow. It does not challenge. It does not resist. It repeats. The modern mirror behaves the same way. When a thought is shared and immediately affirmed, when an emotion is displayed and instantly validated, when silence is replaced by reaction, the inner world stops expanding. It begins to circle itself. People often believe that constant self-expression leads to authenticity. But expression without distance creates saturation. There is no pause, no gap where meaning can form. Instead of processing emotions, they are displayed while still raw. Instead of understanding identity, it is performed in real time. And slowly, the individual becomes both actor and audience. watching themselves think, watching themselves feel, watching themselves exist. This creates a peculiar exhaustion, not physical, not even emotional in the usual sense. It is the fatigue of permanent self-attention. The mind never rests, because it is always being observed. Moments are no longer lived forward. They are lived with an internal camera running. Even solitude is no longer empty. It becomes a stage. And in this constant reflection, something essential disappears: depth. Because depth requires stillness, and stillness cannot survive when everything must be visible. The tragedy of the myth is not obsession. It is immobility. The figure does not fall. He does not collapse. He simply stops moving, unable to leave the reflection, yet unable to merge with it, suspended. This is the quiet risk of modern self-focus. Not that people become narcissistic, but that they become stuck, aware of everything, but changed by nothing. At this point, the ancient story quietly crosses into the present, because the reflective surface is no longer water. It is glass. It is a screen. It is a device held inches from the face. The myth of Narcissus survives not because people admire themselves more than before, but because the conditions for reflection have become constant. The modern mirror never closes. It waits in the pocket, on the desk, beside the bed. And unlike the pool in the myth, this mirror responds. It rewards. A shared image receives attention. A thought gains approval. A feeling is echoed back. Each response feels small, almost meaningless on its own, but together they shape behavior. Gradually, attention shifts, not toward the world, but toward how the world reacts to the self. Experiences begin to compete with their representation. A moment is no longer complete unless it is shared. An emotion feels unfinished unless it is seen. This does not happen because people are shallow. It happens because visibility has become a form of reassurance. Being noticed feels like existing. And yet, something subtle is lost. When identity is continuously externalized, the internal sense of self weakens. Instead of asking, "What do I think?" the question becomes, "How was that received?" This creates dependence, not on approval alone, but on reflection. The self no longer stabilizes from within. It stabilizes through response. And the more this cycle repeats, the more silence becomes uncomfortable. Moments without documentation feel empty. Thoughts without expression feel unreal. But silence is where understanding normally forms. Without it, the mind stays busy but shallow, active but unfocused, connected but ungrounded. This is why the myth ends not with punishment, but with disappearance. The figure fades, not because he loved himself too much, but because he lost contact with anything beyond the reflection. The modern danger is similar. Not isolation, but enclosure. A life lived inside its own image. What makes this cycle difficult to break is not vanity. It is comfort. Reflection feels safer than reality. Reality pushes back. Other people disagree. They misunderstand. They leave. The mirror does none of these things. It stays. And over time, the mind learns a quiet lesson. Control feels better than connection. When someone controls how they are seen, they reduce uncertainty. Angles are chosen. Words are edited. Emotions are filtered. Nothing unexpected enters. But growth has always depended on friction. Without resistance, there is no adjustment. Without contradiction, there is no depth. This is why constant self-presentation slowly replaces self-discovery. Instead of exploring thoughts privately, they are shaped for display. Instead of sitting with confusion, it is posted and resolved through reaction. The inner world becomes outsourced, and something subtle but serious happens. People begin to confuse clarity with exposure. They feel understood because they are visible. But visibility is not the same as being known. Being known requires time, silence, misunderstanding, correction. The mirror offers none of this. It offers speed. Immediate response feels like understanding, but it bypasses reflection. So the same thoughts return, slightly reworded, slightly repackaged. The same emotions repeat, never fully processed. This repetition feels active, but it is static. Like the figure at the water's edge, movement stops without collapse. Life continues, but sideways, busy, yet strangely unchanged. And because this state does not feel painful, it is rarely questioned. There is no crisis, no clear loss, just a quiet narrowing of attention. The world outside becomes background, the self becomes foreground, and slowly the mirror replaces the horizon. One of the quiet consequences of living inside reflection is how it reshapes relationships. Connection begins to feel risky, not because others are dangerous, but because they are unpredictable. Another person does not mirror perfectly. They misread tone, they respond late, they disagree. And disagreement, when someone is used to reflection, feels like rejection. So interaction becomes careful, polished, strategic. People share enough to be seen, but not enough to be changed. Vulnerability is edited into something presentable. This creates a strange social atmosphere. Everyone appears expressive, yet few feel deeply understood. Everyone is visible, yet intimacy feels rare. The reason is simple. True intimacy disrupts self-image. It reveals blind spots. It introduces contradiction. It forces revision. The mirror avoids all of this. So when the mirror becomes the primary reference point, relationships slowly lose depth. They become parallel performances. Two people reflecting themselves at each other, without truly crossing. Loneliness grows not from absence, but from surface-level presence. And because there is constant interaction, the loneliness feels confusing. People ask, how can I feel alone when I am always connected? The myth answers quietly. Connection without movement is still isolation. Standing close to the water does not mean leaving the shore. And here, the story reaches its most important point. The tragedy is not self-love. It is self-containment, a life folded inward. The modern individual does not need fewer mirrors. They need moments without reflection, moments where attention moves outward, where thought is not immediately displayed, where emotion is allowed to exist privately. This is not withdrawal. It is reorientation. Because only when attention leaves the surface can depth return. The ancient story ends quietly. There is no dramatic realization, no sudden awakening, only stillness. And that ending matters because it reflects how change actually begins, not with noise, but with absence. The moment the reflection loses its grip is not when it is rejected, but when attention simply moves elsewhere, not toward another mirror, but toward the world, toward uncertainty, toward friction, toward experiences that cannot be captured or replayed. Depth returns slowly, through unshared moments, through thoughts that remain unfinished, through emotions that are felt but not displayed. This does not erase identity. It strengthens it, because identity was never meant to be observed constantly. It was meant to be lived. The myth survives because it is not about vanity. It is about orientation. Where attention rests, life follows. And when attention becomes trapped on the surface, movement stops. But when attention shifts outward, even briefly, the surface loosens. The water no longer holds the gaze, and the story, at last, continues.
You reached the end of this video. That alone tells me something important. This was not passive listening. This was sustained, high-level attention in English. You followed abstract ideas, symbolic language, and long chains of reasoning without simplification. That is exactly what C2 level listening demands. Most people don't finish content like this. You did. And that means your ability to process complex thought in English is already operating at an advanced level. In this video, you didn't just hear a myth. You examined how self-reflection shapes modern behavior, how constant visibility affects identity, and why attention is one of the most powerful psychological forces we have. If this felt challenging, that's a good sign. Real progress never feels effortless. For other listening levels, you can explore the rest of the channel. And if this experience was valuable to you, subscribing, sharing, or leaving a comment helps this work continue. We'll continue with another C2 level exploration in the next video. Well done. And thank you for listening.